You sit down to do one normal task, and focus dies before the task has even had the dignity of becoming work. Not after an hour, not after a heroic struggle. Basically immediately, like your brain saw one rectangle on a desk and filed a workplace safety complaint. A notification appears, or maybe just the possibility of one, which is somehow enough to create a tiny emergency with no evidence and excellent marketing. Then a useful tab becomes available, which is the most dangerous kind of distraction because it arrives wearing a little productivity costume. Then a worry opens. Then a random memory opens. Then the sudden need to check one completely unnecessary thing opens. And none of these exits looks dramatic enough to count as failure, which is convenient because the task is now sitting there untouched, like a very patient accusation. So focus does not always collapse because you make one big, stupid decision. Sometimes it just leaks out through 5 tiny doors before anyone has the decency to call it distraction. The phone is the easiest suspect here, and honestly, yes, it has earned the little detective board with red string, because a modern notification does not need to steal your afternoon. It only needs to cut the thread for a second, then leave you holding 2 loose ends and a stupid glowing rectangle. In the wild study, 15 smartphone users received 6,854 notifications in a week, which works out to about 63 a day per person. That is not a phone, that is a tiny administrative department with vibration privileges. And the nastier part is that the notification does not even need to be important, or answered, or touched, like some cursed productivity relic. Research has found that phone alerts can disrupt attention task performance even when people do not pick up the phone at all. So yes, blaming the phone is not dumb. It is sitting right beside the task, offering a cheaper exit with better lighting and almost no entry fee. The task asks you to hold a goal in place. The phone asks you to glance at one tiny thing for 2 seconds, which is how every bad negotiation begins. But if the phone were the whole story, the solution would be wonderfully annoying and simple. Throw it in another room and become a desk monk. Well, no, because the next door does not always open on the table. This is where the phone explanation starts leaking, because the phone is not interrupting a giant warehouse of attention. It is interrupting something closer to a tiny desk with bad lighting, 4 slots, and one very tired manager pretending this is a scalable operation. Your brain has systems trying to hold the goal in place, basically saying, stay with the task, keep the thread, do not wander off to investigate socks. But it also has systems built to notice sudden, salient, possibly important things, because ignoring every unexpected signal is a bold strategy if you enjoy being eaten by history. So attention is not one switch. It is more like a small control room where one worker is guarding the task, while another keeps pulling the fire alarm because something moved. Now add the working memory problem. The mind can only hold a few meaningful chunks at once, not the entire contents of your life arranged in labeled storage bins. So when the task is sitting there, it is not alone. It is sharing desk space with the phone, the useful tab, the unpaid thought, the vague worry, and the fact that you are suddenly thirsty. Very serious cognitive infrastructure, basically a folding table at a busy airport. And before the internet even joins the meeting, the task is already competing inside a cramped system that was never designed to hold everything politely in one place. Which means leaving the task for a second is not just leaving. It is asking this tiny desk to rebuild the whole arrangement when you come back. So every switch arrives with a tiny administrative fee, which is annoying because the fee is charged and the currency focus actually uses context. When you leave the task, the brain has to drop one goal, load another, remember a different set of rules, and later act like the first goal was waiting politely in a labeled folder. It was not. That quick check is closer to closing a book, throwing away the bookmark, and then congratulating yourself on becoming a more dynamic reader. In one field study of information workers, people spent about 11 minutes in a working sphere before switching, and more than half of those spheres were interrupted. The hopeful part is that most interrupted work did get resumed the same day. The less adorable part is that it usually came back only after other working spheres had already marched through the room and touched everything. So the task is not just paused. It gets buried under 2 or 3 new little contexts, each with its own rules, urgency, and deeply unnecessary paperwork. And because movement feels like effort, bouncing between things can feel productive in the moment. You are doing things. Many things. A whole impressive circus of things, except the original task is still in the corner wondering where its bookmark went. That is how switching turns from a tiny escape into a measurable cost. Not because you left forever, but because returning is never as clean as leaving. Returning is already messy, but interruption has an even worse trick. It can make you look faster while making the work feel worse. In one lab study, people doing interrupted email tasks actually finished faster, which sounds like a productivity manager's dream if that manager hates humans. Then the bill arrives somewhere else. More stress, more frustration, more time pressure, and more effort. So the output can move quicker while the person making it becomes a small pressure cooker with keyboard access. Inaccuracy is not exactly having a spa day either. In one sequence task experiment, an interruption of only 2.8 seconds doubled errors, and 4.4 seconds tripled them. That is a ridiculous amount of damage for something shorter than deciding whether to reply with thanks or thanks. So the problem is not only that distraction wastes time, it changes the conditions under which the work is being made. The task may still get done, sure, but now it is done under pressure, with the thread repaired badly and the brain pretending the cracks are a design feature. And just when it would be convenient to blame all of this on external pings, the brain does something deeply rude. It starts interrupting itself. The rude part is that the brain does not need a notification to interrupt you. It has a full internal supply chain. Because when you leave something unfinished, attention does not always detach cleanly, shake hands, and move on like a mature professional adult. Part of it can stay stuck to the old task, which researchers call attention residue, because apparently even your focus comes with leftovers. So now the current task is not just fighting the phone, it is fighting whatever you half did earlier and never properly part. The email you did not answer, the thing you need to remember later, the weird little admin gremlin whispering, actually, we should solve me now. And this matters because unfinished goals can keep producing intrusive thoughts, which then weaken performance on unrelated tasks. Very efficient system. Nothing says concentration like being haunted by a calendar item with no appointment. But there is a useful clue here. In studies on unfinished goals, making a specific plan reduce that mental interference, not a grand life transformation. Not becoming the sort of person who owns 7 matching notebooks and says deep work at brunch. Just giving the unfinished thing a place to wait so it stops kicking the door open while you are trying to do something else. That is the midpoint shift. Focus is not only defense against new distractions, it is also cleanup from old ones. And if the mind keeps choosing the exits, the next question is uglier. What makes the exit so much easier than the task? So here is the ugly little mechanism hiding under the whole mess. Focus usually loses when the task has more friction than the exit, not because the exit is always valuable. Plenty of exits are nutritionally empty nonsense with a search bar, but they are clear, they are open, they ask almost nothing from you before giving a tiny hit of novelty, certainty, or relief. The task, meanwhile, may start with fog. What exactly am I doing first? How good does this need to be? Why does this rectangle already feel disappointed in me? That uncertainty is friction before the work even begins. And boredom is not just nothing is happening. Boredom is closer to wanting to engage, but not finding a satisfying way into the thing in front of you, which is an extremely annoying state because the brain is not relaxed. It is hungry, restless, and browsing the room for a better menu. Then add emotional friction. Maybe the task is not hard, but it carries the possibility of feedback, failure, awkwardness, shame, or simply the sacred human feeling of. Very scientific term. Ugh. So the side door wins because it offers a cleaner bargain. Step through here and get something now. The task offers the opposite bargain. Give me effort first, tolerate uncertainty first, maybe get reward later, and also please bring your own emotional helmet. Once you see that, the phone becomes only one contestant in the attention zoo. The deeper competition is between friction and escape, and that competition gets nastier when stress, anxiety, or sleep loss starts weakening the control system that is supposed to keep the task selected. Now obviously habits matter, and devices matter, and the little glowing rectangle is still not being promoted to innocent bystander, but focus also depends on the condition of the control system trying to hold the task in place. Anxiety can make that system less efficient, because attention starts leaning toward possible threats and signals instead of staying locked on the goal, which is extremely useful if there is an actual tiger. Less useful if the tiger is a vague email, a deadline, and one suspicious sound from the fridge. Stress does something similar, especially when it feels uncontrollable. The brain manager is still technically at the desk, but the office around it is now yelling, and sleep loss is even less subtle. Vigilant attention gets worse when you are underslept, because apparently the brain wants basic maintenance before operating heavy machinery. Deeply unfair, very biologically on brand, so the same task can be easier on one day and weirdly impossible on another, not because your personality changed overnight like a cursed software update. It is because the system holding the spotlight may be tired, noisy, or already pulled toward danger signals. That does not make every distraction harmless, and it does not mean discipline is fake. It means discipline is not magic. If the manager is exhausted and the office is on fire, just focus is less of a strategy and more of a motivational poster committing fraud. So naturally, the obvious fix shows up wearing a black turtleneck and calling it self-discipline. Block everything. Turn on Do Not Disturb. Delete the apps. Put the phone in another room. Maybe bury it in the field, depending on how cinematic your productivity era has become. And mechanically, yes, closing exits helps. Fewer pings means fewer cheap doors opening beside the task. In a Do Not Disturb study, people felt less distracted and more productive, which is exactly the part every productivity app would put in the trailer. But here comes the less marketable part. They also felt more anxious and less socially connected, because humans are annoying like that. We have obligations, messages, people who might need us, and a nervous system that does not always enjoy being put in airplane mode. So pure restriction can work like a locked room, but locked rooms are not always calm. Sometimes they just make you wonder what is happening outside the door. And even if you close the exits, the task can still be foggy, boring, emotionally sticky, or too big to grab cleanly. So the answer cannot just be block everything, and it cannot just be try harder, which is tragic news for posters, apps, and people with very aggressive morning routines. So focus is not a personality trait sitting permanently inside you like a tiny moral certificate. It is a temporary balance, and the balance is fragile because the task has to beat every cheaper, louder alternative in the room. The task has to be clear enough that the brain knows where to put the first handhold. It has to be emotionally manageable enough that avoidance does not walk in with a clipboard and start making excellent points. It has to be easier to re-enter after interruption, because otherwise every small break turns into a full archaeological dig through your own context. And the exits have to be just inconvenient enough that leaving is not the default setting. That is the trap. Focus looks like commanding a spotlight once, but really it is rescuing the spotlight again and again from things that promise faster relief. Not better things, not smarter things, just cheaper things. So the task does not need to become thrilling, sacred, or worthy of a productivity podcast with dramatic piano music. It needs a fighting chance in a very unfair room. So no, distraction is not harmless, and discipline is not useless, which is unfortunate because simple answers would be much cheaper to animate. The sharper point is that focus gets easier when the task becomes real enough to start, small enough to hold, and less escapable than the doors around it. Not perfect, not heroic, just slightly more concrete than the noise, which is about as glamorous as attention maintenance gets. And then the original task is still there in the corner, not as your enemy, but as one small object trying to survive an entire modern attention zoo.